Chapter 13. The bus stopped just once before the border, in the pitch-black night. One by one, the Federales left the bus, walked away into the darkness, and quickly returned. I guessed they were going to pee. Elena had never been able to wait to go, and I knew she was suffering with every bump in the road. Well, fine, she deserved to suffer a little. As for me, my butt hurt, my neck ached, and my legs were cramped from being doubled up. Morales had forbidden us to stand or change seats. The complaining finally began. "Ay, Capitan, let us out, just for a minute," one called out. "What do you want? A big mess on the bus?" "Usa una botella," Morales sneered. He motioned for the driver to get going, sat back down, and pulled his cap over his eyes. Several men cursed him quietly. "They're no better than the worms they feed on a dead corpse," Javi said sourly, nodding his head in the direction of our jailers. He rubbed his forehead with both hands and then ran his hands through his hair, attempting to comb it with his fingers. He shrugged, raising his hands, palm up. "But their work will be for nothing. We all come back. All of us." Javier looked around the bus to confirm his opinion. "This isn't the first time for them, either." He pointed at the two brothers, then he paused. "For them, it's a minor setback, nothing more." He motioned to the black man across the aisle. "And that guy? He has come all the way from Brazil. Do you know how far that is? He would never let an idiot like Morales get in his way." Javier studied me curiously for a moment. Then he turned slightly in his seat to catch a glimpse of Elena behind us. "¿Quién? Your girlfriend? What are you going to do about her? She is a liability, you know. She will slow you down." Elena leaned forward, placing her chin on the edge of our seat. Her head was right between ours. "I won't slow anybody down because I am traveling alone, and I am not his girlfriend. I am his sister. I already told him I know what to do, and he does not need to worry about me." Elena spoke to Javier. She said it as if I were not even there. "Actually," she said to Javi, ignoring Elena. "Actually," I said to Javi, ignoring Elena. "She's only 13 years old. You can tell what a baby she is by how she behaves. Now I will be forced to change all my plans and take her back home. She is so selfish. She did not think that far ahead." "It's her fault we ended up like this," I continued. "Most of us would all be all the way to the border by now if it were not for her." I only half believed this, but I said it anyway to hurt Elena. It felt good to say the things I had been thinking all night long. Javi was grinning. He did not seem to care who won the argument. He was just enjoying the entertainment. "That's not true. That ugly fat Capitan would have let me back on the bus if Miguel had not called out my name the way he did." Elena's voice got louder with each word. By then, half of the bus was listening. "And just who does he think he is? He's the one that was going to leave me all by myself in San Jacinto. I now know how to get north, and I am going to do it." Elena stood up, gripping the metal edge of the seat with both hands. "I am not going back to San Jacinto. Not ever!" she screamed over my head. Capitan Morales stood up at the front of the bus. He stared long and hard at Elena, hitched up his pants, and yelled, "Shut up, all of you!" Morales turned back toward the driver. "Callinson!" Just then, the bus lurched. Morales lost his balance. He reached for the seat next to him, missed the back, and fell on his knees in the aisle. He grunted and pushed himself up. His pants fell down. We could all see most of his giant, naked bottom. Elena giggled quietly behind me. Javier's laugh began. Elena giggled quietly behind me. Javier's laugh began low in his gut and ended in a series of loud snorts that flew out his nose like a donkey's bray. It ended in a giant wheeze. I began to laugh. I could not help it. Then everyone started to laugh, with Javi and at Morales. For the moment, we did not care if Morales got back at us. But Morales made like it never happened. At the front of the bus, in front of us all, he adjusted his uniform jacket and sweat-stained cap. He pulled up his pants, once more trying to get them over his bulging gut. Finally, he withdrew his pistol from its holster and inspected it casually. The barrel gleamed in the half-light of the dawning sun, glowing through the window of the bus. It was all an act, like his earlier shakedown, but it worked. Silence fell over the bus again. Javier's wheezing that had begun with his laughter had not stopped. His chest rose and fell with effort and to take air in, but he did not stop smiling. He leaned over and whispered in my ear, "I wonder if this guy is as stupid as he looks. I think he might be. I am going to find out." With that, Javier scrunched down, settled his head against the metal edge of the back of the seat, and closed his eyes. I fell asleep to the sound of Javi's breaths, low and insistent. Chapter 14. My stomach growled loudly, waking me from my nap. I kicked my backpack angrily. I regretted gobbling down every bite of Abuelita's tacos and fruit the day before. Suddenly, without a word said, food appeared. It came out of pockets, duffel bags, backpacks, paper sacks. Someone peeled oranges and passed the pieces around. My share was 2 small slices. The black man took out a torta, unwrapped it, and tore it into rough chunks to share. There were pieces of taco, tortilla, a few chicharrones, some dry cookies. Elena dug up a brown squishy banana. She broke off an end piece and passed it to me. She knew it was the only part of a banana I liked. She meant it as a small peace offering. I ate it, but I did not feel like making peace with her. I would not ever forgive her stupidity. Out the window, I saw the landscape had changed. A thick forest, almost a jungle, lined the rutted road. The bus slowed to a crawl. A long line of people walked single file on both sides of the road. Most headed the opposite direction from us. Through the front window of the bus, I could barely see the outline of a town in the distance. A lazy green river snaked along the road part of the way. Discarded plastic bottles, car tires, and rusty cans littered the banks. A small flotilla of makeshift rafts ferried dozens of people across the slow-moving water from Guatemala to Mexico. Javi pointed. "Look," he said knowingly. "See how easy it is here? I told you. You pay a few pesos, they bring you back across." Small open-air stands with palm frond roofs sold a variety of goods: food, cigarettes, beer, clothing of all kinds, hats. Several stalls advertised notaries who could provide expert assistance with documents. I laughed to myself. This was the border. You could buy anything here. You could get anything here. You just had to pay for it. Javier nudged me with his elbow. "There, up there. That's the bridge we cross. Over there is Guatemala." He pointed, then shifted his body closer. "But why should we have to cross over just to come back the same day or the next? Doesn't that seem ridiculous to you?" "We'll stop before the bridge for procedures. You know, the usual paperwork. They will take us out of the bus to escort us across." He leaned his head even closer and whispered in my ear, Watch me carefully. I am going to try an old trick that's proven useful several times in the past. If you see a chance, escape." Javier looked around the bus at all the young men. He turned in his seat and looked at Elena, then at me again. He smiled to himself, as if he had a private joke. "Pass the word to everyone," he said. "Tell them what I told you. Be quiet about it." I whispered Javi's instructions to Elena and to the brothers in front of us. I told them to pass it on. I leaned across the aisle and delivered them to the black man. His brows knit together as I spoke. He leaned forward to relay the message. Before long, the news of a possible escape traveled the length of the bus. We sat higher in our seats. For the first time since the disaster with Morales began, I felt hopeful. Even if Javi's scheme failed, whatever it was, we would have tried. As Javier predicted, the bus ground to a halt next to a small adobe building. A slight, mousy man in a uniform motioned to the federales. One exited the bus and huddled with the border official. Straight ahead was the bridge, a rickety structure that looked like it could support the weight of a bicycle, much less a bus. Morales ordered us off and herded us close to the building. I clutched my backpack and eyed Javi sideways, waiting and wondering. Morales gave us a mean look, touched his pistol in its holster, and moved out of earshot. He continued to stab at his clipboard with his index finger, trying to make some point. The immigration official appeared to disagree, shaking his head. The other federales wandered over toward Morales. Papers were passed back and forth. Heads bent over Morales' clipboard. Check marks were made. I was sure some money would change hands. They'd pay each other to keep quiet about all the things each was doing wrong. Morales' face got redder by the moment. I could imagine him running drugs or guns. We were probably nothing to him, just a little extra pocket change. Javi whispered in my ear, "He wants to dump us like trash in Guatemala. Well, he's got a surprise coming. Watch me ruin Morales' day." Javi began to walk toward the officials. He swayed and stumbled, clutching his throat and choking. Then he fell flat on the ground, right in front of Morales. His eyes rolled back in his head until I could only see the whites. His legs, then his arms began to jerk violently. White foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. He wailed, a sound more animal than human. Javi had said it was an old trick, but it looked like the real thing. A crowd gathered, mixing with our group. Morales looked at Javi like he was some strange creature he'd never seen before. Finally, Morales began a feeble attempt to control Javi's flailing limbs. He got his beefy arms around Javi's chest and yelled to the other officials, "Get over here! Get this guy out of here!" I grabbed Elena's hand and took one slow step back. I made eye contact with the two brothers and the black man. We nodded to each other. Already the Indios and 5 or 6 of the other men had disappeared. They had left quickly and silently, melting into the crowd that surrounded Javier. It was as if they had never existed. I turned and ran, dragging Elena after me. I heard screams, gunshots, and Morales' booming voice. "Alto! Alto! Halt, or I'll shoot!" More shots rang out. Was Morales mad enough to shoot Javi right there? Had he figured out it was a trick? Javi had taken a big risk. He had more to lose than we did. A lot more. After all, he had a family to think about. A son my age, a daughter, a wife, and he was a lot older. Ancient. Older even than Papa. He had already tried once to make it and had failed. If he escaped Morales, if he made it across from Guatemala again, he would be desperate. Who wouldn't? We ran faster than we had ever run before. I held Elena's hand tighter than I needed to. I would not lose her. I intended to put her on the first bus that I could find home to San Jacinto, and then I'd go north, alone. I did not even want to think about what Morales would do if he caught us. Chapter 15. We had two choices for escape. Back in the direction the bus traveled, cutting into the dense forest around the bend, or straight toward the center of town. I chose the second. We ran into the crowds of people in the Zocalo and the Mercado next to it. Maybe we could blend in and lose Morales forever. Miguel! Elena huffed. Stop for a minute! She jerked her hand away and trotted around the back of a little stand selling piles of watches, cheap jewelry, sodas, snacks, sports caps, and newspapers. She leaned against the back of the stall. I tried to catch my breath, but the air was so humid it felt like I was breathing in water. Sweat streamed down our faces, necks, and arms, and dripped to the ground. I can't run any more in this. Elena put down her string bag and motioned to her clothing. Her long Indiana skirt grazed her feet. The hem was torn and dirty. Her shoes peeked out from a pair of sandals. Her toes peeked out from a pair of sandals. Her shawl had fallen off one shoulder and one end dragged on the ground. I looked around. We had ended up behind a long line of stalls on one edge of the Mercado. Except for a few stacks of boxes, the narrow, shaded passageway was empty. It was not a bad place to hide for a while. We could at least catch our breath. Elena squatted down and opened her bag. Turn around, Miguel. I'm going to change. She pulled out a pair of jeans, her sneakers, and a t-shirt. I ignored her command, took her bag, and opened it further. There was only one other shirt and a sweater. At the bottom was the little purse of Mama's letters and Elena's wallet. I grabbed it quickly, holding it over my head beyond her reach. Give it back, Miguel. That's my money. She reached for the wallet. I swatted her hand away. I sat down on the dirt, cross-legged, opened the wallet, and took out the money. I counted the bills one by one, very slowly, looking at Elena in between each. It was not as much as Don Clemente gave me. It was not enough to pay for a coat. Still, it was a lot of money for a 13-year-old to be carrying around. Where did you get this? Donde? I demanded. I could not imagine how she got her hands on so much cash. It could not have come from Abuelita or anyone else in the family. Elena stared at the ground sullenly. It is enough to go north, isn't it? That is all that matters. She started to cry, just like she always did when she got into trouble. Chiona, I hissed at her, you got us into this mess. I'd be all the way to the border by now if it were not for you. I grabbed her wrist tightly and twisted. You will tell me where you got this money, now. Ouch, Miguel, let go. You are hurting me, Elena complained. Her eyes again filled with tears. I tightened my hold. I did not care if I hurt her. I hoped I hurt her. Elena was silent for several minutes. Then she gave in. Juanito, she murmured, continuing to look at the ground. What? ¿Qué dijiste? I couldn't believe I'd heard her correctly. Juanito, she repeated. He gave me the money. I went to him and asked, and he just gave it to me. She took up a handful of dirt and let it fall slowly through her fingers to the ground. She did this over and over, as if she was sifting the earth for something she lost and couldn't find. How could you, Elena? Juanito es un vendido. He's a sellout. He would sell out his own people. I was disgusted. We will never be able to pay him back. Never. He will always want more. I had never told Elena how much I hated Juanito for using Don Clemente to get on the soccer team. But she lived in San Jacinto just like I did, and in San Jacinto everyone knew what everyone else was like. Juanito wasn't just a lazy cheater who cut corners to get what he wanted. He was dangerous. If he was not already, he would soon be trafficking drugs for one of the big cartels, and he wouldn't let Don Clemente get in his way. Why, Elena? And how? How did you do all of this? I asked coldly. In a small monotone, Elena told me how she watched every move I made in the weeks before I left. She explained how she looked in my secret hiding place behind the wall to find Don Clemente's instructions. She told me how she searched out Juanito at the cantina where he hung out, how she went right up to him and asked for the money, how he just pulled it out of his pocket as if it were spare change. How could you make everyone worry? What about Abuelita? How could you leave her alone? You were supposed to stay and take care of her, I said angrily. No tienes vergüenza? And didn't you realize it wasn't enough money to follow Don Clemente's plan? Didn't you understand what would happen? Elena wiped the tears off her face, snuffled, and blew her nose into the hem of her skirt. You don't care about me, Miguel. You only care about you and your plans. You never cared about leaving me alone. I'm the one who wanted to go north more than anyone, but you never bothered to ask how I felt, and you wouldn't understand anyway, Elena said finally. We're going home, Elena. We're going home together. We'll take the money back to Juanito, every single peso, and then... I don't know. I paused. I felt defeated. I would have to talk to Don Clemente again. I would need to start all over, and I would have to call Papa and have him threaten Elena with her life if she moved even 1 foot out of San Jacinto. In the end, Elena did what I said. We changed clothes, and I brought us caps and cheap sunglasses. Elena pushed her hair up under her cap, and I pulled mine down over my eyes. We did not want Morales to recognize us easily. He might still be in town. I took the money Juanito had given Elena and tucked it into my own pouch for safekeeping. I left Elena at a small restaurant where we splurged on huevos con chorizo. I went to the bus station to check the schedule. The next bus to San Jacinto left at 6 o'clock the following morning. I bought 2 one-way tickets home. In the evening, I took Elena into the only movie theater in town. We sat through a double feature to kill time. The screen was wavy and torn, and the sound system crackled. The words out of sync with the picture. The air conditioner worked off and on, from hot to cold to hot again. I sat and watched and remembered nothing